Hi, everybody. This is Stephen Kelley. My name is Stephen. Yes, that's right. My name is Stephen D. Kelley. This is the Stephen D. Kelley Show, and it's Thursday night. 6:02. Didn't waste too much time. It's actually, what is this? The first day of June. It's 6/1/2023. The month after May. The first day after May. What a month May was. May was kind of a wow, lots of stuff happened. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, per se. I mean, the personal stuff happened. I'll just say this. I did do this show last night. With a guy named Sean. Let me see, what was the name of his show? Oh, it was Decoded Memories. That's it. Anyway, he actually broadcasted on YouTube, which was amazing that we got away with that. But anyway, it was a lot of fun, and I was there for about 2.5 hours, I think, roughly, almost 2.5 hours. We were talking. I know we could have kept going for much longer, but I was like, oh, come on, I know we got to end this. But the point is that a lot of the things I wanted to say tonight, messages I wanted to get out, I kind of got out last night. Hi, Julie. Anyway, so tonight's show is going to be a little bit different. I mean, like I said, these big messages I wanted to get out, I think I kind of got out very, very well. But tonight I'm going to focus a little bit on what's going on in the world, per se. I know it sounds like current events and all that, but I do need to talk about this because it's kind of serious, and I'm hoping that, if you do pay attention to these things, that you'll understand why it is so important to push our mission. But before I get into all that Ukraine business and what's going on with Russia versus the West, the so-called collective West, I should mention that we're been having a nice little growth spurt in the group, the Occupy the Getty / Stephen D. Kelley group in Telegram. And this is exciting. It's always exciting when we see people come in. We just passed, 4,500 people this time yesterday, roughly, when I think I was doing that show. The first thing I mentioned on the show is that we had gained 20 people, and we were only at, 4,360 or 70, something of this nature. So this is a nice little influx of people, and, I say, I don't know, rhetorically, I guess, where are all these people coming from? What happened? Usually there's a meme or something or a show, somebody said something, and it inspires a bunch of people to come check us out or come check me out, look up my name, look up this whole Getty business. But I'm not seeing it. Now, one of the people did make a comment. They said that it was something they saw in Twitter, like a meme or something like that. So I'm thinking, okay, Christian, one of your memes, or Rob Roy, one of you guys is, one of your memes struck a nerve. But at the same time, I'm not really sensing that, because usually somebody will share it or whatever. I'll get some clue to what happened and where it happened, and this time we're not getting that. And I'm seeing a lot of people who are kind of Trump oriented, if you want to go say that, and that makes me wonder even more if this was something that happened in a group out there that I'm not privy to. But either way, what it really seems to appear like, even though I'm maybe in denial, is that our message is really taking hold. We're catching fire. We've got a lot of interest going on. And dare I say that a lot of the things perhaps that some people might find distasteful in our group, the way you guys act all messianic with me and stuff like that, I know that's got to really rub a lot of people the wrong way. And don't act like you don't, because some of you do. And I'm not complaining. I mean, I'm not trying to encourage you, but I'm just saying that that does not fly really super great out there. But I'm thinking that a lot of people are kind of getting used to this stuff, because, I was like on the show last night, I flat out said this world is controlled by the crown, and there's a power struggle right now. And like Sean said so eloquently, if you haven't seen the show, you don't understand. But this is Game of Thrones. So yeah, that's exactly what it is. The whole world is one big Game of Thrones, and I already know I win this thing. So, if that bothers you, that's I understand. But I'm beginning to get the impression that more and more people aren't bothered by that, and they're actually kind of encouraged by it because, well, I offer an alternative to what's going on right now that's actually viable and not insane. I know that sounds insane itself, but it's true. Now, we'll talk about insanity, like the what's going on in the military right now. I mean, and I'm going to try to be coherent because it's like when I start talking about with the Russian military and what's going on over there in Ukraine and the way that NATO, et cetera, are responding, I can be all over the map and not remember things I want to say. But I'll do my best to try to wrap this up. But before I dive into that, just so I can remember this little key thing myself, is that ultimately, and not that this has anything to do with our mission, but ultimately what we're seeing here with this struggle between the collective West, which, we really know what that is, it's kind of let's just say that it's going to the world, it's going to appear to be capitalism against everything else. Now, I know most of the world, even the so-called socialist countries, have become capitalist, and this is why they can do this. But what we're doing is the epitome of that, and it goes beyond that. But there's a lot of words that are abused. Democracy, of course, is one of these. We are the protectors and the guardians of democracy, and we act like this is what we're really all about. We're trying to promote this in other countries that are under, lesser systems. But here in the USA, we so often hear, especially with respect to social media and respect to the stuff that we say that's so often being called disinformation, we're being told that what we're doing, the things that we're saying, our speech, that thing that we think that we have freedom of, apparently is a threat to democracy, a dangerous threat to democracy, a very dangerous threat to democracy. Now, I keep hearing that over and over and over. Everything's a threat to democracy. Now, I don't think they understand really what that is, but the reality is democracy is, I'd rather have a republic. I'd rather have a Republican system, not this. Anyway, the point is that this thing that they're calling democracy it's something else. It's something corrupt. Now, I'm going to have to kind of compare these two systems. And in the warfare, I'll just say this before I get into the, the real stuff. And obviously I'm knowledgeable about these things because I worked in the military industrial complex for various different corporations. And as my own company, I submitted bids to the Department of Defense for projects and that kind of thing. Of course, they would never accept anything I did or put forth, but they would certainly rip it off and send it to somebody like Lockheed. But so I'm very familiar with it, and I'm familiar with the procurement process, and obviously my lasers were being used by the military, and I had many opportunities to get involved with companies that would have just, let's just say made a lot of money and played a lot of games. But the point is that in our competitive system, it's all or nothing. It's a couple corporations competing against each other to provide a product. Half the time, these corporations merge, and you get something like Martin Marietta, Lockheed, blah blah blah. This is or Boeing, for instance. Boeing is a combination of so many different companies: Rockwell, McDonnell Douglas, then Boeing. I guess I'm not sure if there was another one before that, but well, Rockwell, before Rockwell, it was something else too. It was Rock. Companies merged to make Rockwell. Anyway, I'm sure that was way before everyone's time, and that's dating me. That's going back to the Apollo era. But the point is that in a country like Russia, where the government basically puts this stuff out, they're going to have multiple factories making these systems. And sure, they have competition between companies like MiG and Sukhoi for fighter aircraft, this kind of thing, like we do with General Dynamics and Lockheed or Northrop Grumman, whoever is still making planes nowadays, Boeing. But the thing is it's not the cutthroat thing that we do here. Over here, they'll spend all kinds of money on marketing and promotion and say their thing is the end all, that does everything, and slices your bread for you and makes toast and serves your coffee and everything else, and beats the enemy with your eyes closed. And the enemy, it's all fluff and mirrors and smoke and BS. Now, some of it's not completely BS, but the bottom line is all that effort that goes into selling and competing and trying to make a system that has more gadgets and buzzers and features and promises to win those contracts, they compromise the quality of the system. More money is spent that doesn't need to be spent. There's corruption involved. People are getting paid off like crazy, of course, corruption just to secure these orders. What ends up happening is the system that's selected is not always the best system. It's kind of like VHS versus beta. So the point is that in a system like they have in Russia, which of course is a derivative of what the Soviet system used to be like, the competition is not quite the same. Obviously, there's still money involved. There's probably still some degree of corruption, but it's not like it is here in the USA. When they build these systems, they're not going to completely suspend production on one thing in favor of something else. They're going to make everything. They're going to make more. And the one thing they're not going to do is they're not going to make one system obsolete to introduce another system. They're going to keep all that stuff. Now, if you've been paying attention, I know you don't, there's certain things that the Russians do that we don't do. Or at least if we try to do, we just don't do very well. For instance, rockets, short-range rockets. Kind of like artillery, only artillery shell with a rocket on the end of it. Now, in World War II, of course, the Russians had this thing they called the Stalin's organs, or there's another name for that, GS something or other. But anyway, they were basically a big truck with a thing on the back that had a whole bunch of tubes, and each one of these tubes had a rocket, and they would fire off one at a time, whoosh, 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 and they would have several of these trucks, and they would all point them in the direction of a city and raise these things up so they were going to fly with a certain trajectory and all that. Well, the point is they're not accurate, but they're cheap, they're deadly, they saturate an area, and they can overwhelm forces. And they're also very much a standoff weapon that you can shoot and run, shoot and scoot. Now, the Russians, their military doctrine right now is shoot and scoot. And the thing is that there's a lot of people that say, well, in World War II, they sacrificed soldiers, this and that. They're not stupid. They know numerically, even though they're a big country, ultimately they have limits on their population, and they don't have any desire to go through their trained troops, kind of like Ukraine has done with theirs. So they're going to not expose them to that much combat. They're going to keep them on the front, but they're going to use these UAVs. They're going to locate the enemy, and they're going to move in artillery, fire it off, and then back off before there can be any response. They're not sending in big aero wave assaults into anything. If they do anything, they'll have a little scout unit to try to draw the fire up of the enemy, and then immediately detect where the enemy is and bombard it with overwhelming superior firepower. Now, as I've said before, and I know this is getting redundant, the bottom line, the Russians have overwhelming superior firepower when it comes to things, conventional things like howitzers, self-propelled howitzers, cannons, things like this. Big cannons, 152 millimeter, 155 millimeter. I think they're using 152 millimeter. But these are large, and they have some that go up to like 180 something millimeter that are extremely large. And they have the ability to produce almost 20 times more shells, artillery shells, than the collective West, United States included. And on top of that, they have these things in storage. They've had them there. They've always been living in a war footing. Now, that's just artillery shells. So artillery alone, they have completely got us beat in a ground war. And not just in the number of shells that they can fire, but the number of actual artillery units that they can field, and their ability to destroy enemy units like they've done so well in the Ukraine. Now, we haven't even gotten to drones and all that, but before I do, I want to talk a little bit more about these rockets, because here's the thing. Like I said, they've mastered this stuff. I mean, when Hitler made the V-2 rocket, the Nazis made the V-2 rocket, the Soviets immediately took that thing, took what they captured, and they simplified it. They made the components dirt cheap and easy to produce, and they've been doing that ever since. All of these rockets follow basic concepts that they have perfected in the 40s. Now, turbo pumps and this kind of thing. Extremely important component for a rocket. These Stalin organs, they don't just have the old 1940s looking truck units. They've got quite a few other variations of the same concept of weapon. Quite a few. And each one of these is designed to pull up somewhere close to the front line to engage the enemy. Guys will jump out, crank the thing up, take a couple quick sights with their optics, jump back in the truck and fire off those missiles, and then drive away. Now, there's nothing we can do about that. There's nothing that the West can do about that. There's nothing that any enemy can do about that. Even if you did have a phased array radar system capable of detecting the trajectory of these things coming in such a way that you could respond, first of all, you're going to get wiped out by those things coming in. Your ability to respond is going to be limited to if you're alive and able to fire a functional weapon in the direction of where the stuff came from. But by the time that happens, that thing has already driven away. Remember, these things are in the air, and this thing's already packing it up and driving it away. Driving away. And they've got a little drone above watching everything. These drones are incredible. So I've seen at least 3 or 4 variations of this type of weapons system that fires off these missiles in a shoot and scoot type of situation. Now, these particular weapons, none of these things are guided. There's no radar. There's no GPS. This is just fire a whole bunch of shots at the enemy with high explosive on the tip of every one of them, and you're going to saturate a big, wide area. And the more of these things you have, the bigger the area is, and the harder it is for these guys to hide. Now, this is just one type of weapon. This is just like for infantry and vehicles that are out in the open and don't have any hardened shelters. They have other weapons for that stuff. We'll talk about the Kinjal. But like I said, we don't have anything like that. Now, what do we have? Okay, The big wonder weapon that we offered to Ukraine early in the war was the HIMARS, which was a multiple launch rocket system. And the HIMARS typically, I believe, I'm not sure if they have 4 or 6, maybe 8, I don't know, something of these potential to launch 8 of these missiles, but these are relatively small. They can launch a larger missile that'll go farther, but they'd have to reconfigure it and fire fewer units. But here's the thing. This is a system that is some sort of radar, GPS, whatever tracking. I don't exactly know. I'd have to dig into that. But the point is that in the beginning of their deployment in the field, they were pretty effective in getting through the defenses. And again, the Russians have the best air defenses in the world, and they were able to, of course, they've always been able to shoot these things down, but a few of them would have gotten through. And we suspect that it was probably the HIMARS that they used so effectively on an attack on a fuel depot on an air base in Crimea that everybody made a big deal of a while back. But since then, the Russians have been able to defeat these things with electronic warfare, electronic countermeasures. Now, they're very good at that. Now, we used to scoff at their ability to do this stuff, but trust me, they're really good at that stuff. Now, here's the thing about electronics. Once you get a hold of something and you find out what frequencies it's operating in and what protections and shielding it has, and et cetera, it's not that hard to figure out ways to defeat it. And this is what they've done over and over again. So when you get these expensive missile systems, it doesn't take much. Now, moving on to HIMARS, which are practically useless now. The Russians shoot them down all the time. These are expensive systems. They come from Lockheed, I believe. Or Raytheon, I'm pretty sure it's Lockheed. Either way, there's a couple other big systems that aren't necessarily wonder weapons, but we've introduced, or our allies have introduced. Now, just recently, we delivered a lot of HARM missiles, which are anti-radar missiles. They're very distinctive looking. And the British, of course, have delivered a couple of significant missiles. One being what do they call it? The Storm Shadow cruise missile. Now, the HARM and the cruise missile are both air-launched. They've got to be fitted under the wing of some vehicle, a hardpoint, like in this case, a MiG, an older MiG, whatever it is, these MiGs that these guys are using over there, still left over from the Soviet times. We've outfitted those things for these missiles. Now, the Russians have already defeated the HARM missile, the so-called anti-radiation missile, that supposedly is going to take out the radar systems and then thus allow the other missiles to get through, i.e. the cruise missiles or whatever. Well, problem is there's HARM missiles on the ground all over the place. So it's clear the stuff they're firing isn't going anywhere. It's being defeated. It's falling on the ground. Now, the other ones, the Storm Shadow, that's a kind of a long-range weapon. That's a flyer. That's a cruise missile. And ultimately, they're going to use this at targets that are further away, like Belgorod. We got to talk about Belgorod a little bit. That's inside of Russia. But those are easier to shoot down because they're flying a little slower. And they are being shot down. So Russia has a daily total of these things being shot down. Now, what else? Drones. On and on and on and on and on about the drones. Ukraine is mostly outfitted with a drone, a couple type of drones. Drones that are for kamikaze things where they actually will crash into the target. Those are the things most common that the Russians are using right now. They're the ones that are coming out of Iran. Then there's the ones that will fire missiles, of course, like the American, Predator that fires HARM missiles and such. Well, all kind of copperheads. Then there is the drones that just do surveillance, and those can be in all shapes and sizes. They can look like little small airplanes, or they can look like little quadcopters. Either way, every single one of these things is strategically important and also a threat out there. Well, Russians got more of these things than the Ukrainians do, quite a bit more different kinds, and they use them extensively and very effectively for sighting in their artillery, which they have extensive amounts of, and the effect has been devastating. Now, the Ukrainians, of course, have drones, but one of their most important drones that they spent all kinds of money on was from Turkey. I don't remember what the name of the thing, but the point is that at one time, this drone from Turkey was the big deal when it first came out. Now, when it first came out, there was a war here not too long ago. I believe it was Azerbaijan versus, Armenia. Now, pardon me if I get the players wrong, but I know that Armenia was on the losing end, and I'm pretty sure that Azerbaijan was using the drones supplied to them by Turkey. And needless to say, this gave them quite an advantage over the Armenians, and they were able to just take the territory that they were taking. And I suspect that the Ukrainians saw this as a major selling point because they saw just how effectively these things were used against the Armenians, and they assumed that they would be able to do the same thing against the Russians, which was kind of naive, I think. But anyway, and these things were expensive. Now, of course, got to talk about the Garon drone, or the Garon. It's germanium. Some people call it the germanium drone, but this is that little V-wing system that comes out of Iran and has something like a little lawnmower engine or a little small motorcycle engine in it that drives it. It has like I can't remember, 1,000 kilos of explosive in it, something of it, or not 1,000. I'm sorry, 100 kilos. Yeah, pretty sure it was 100 kilos. Either way. These things used to have a preset course. They were only like $20,000 wholesale. I mean, they were $40,000, $20,000. I suppose they got upwards of who knows what after they got resold. But they're so cheap. And one of these things very easily can take out any one of these wonder weapons that we send over there. Now, if the Russians decide to use these things against a Patriot, that would probably be a waste. But they use them effectively all day against tanks, armored personnel carriers, pickup trucks, howitzers, self-propelled howitzers, radar systems, anti-aircraft systems, command centers, you name it, anything. And they don't cost anything. And one of these tanks is a multi-million-dollar investment, and it's being taken out by a $20,000 drone. Now, of course, the Russians, who are probably manufacturing these things on their own, not necessarily in Iran anymore, they've enhanced them. They're not using just the preset coordinate, aiming, or whatever you want to call that. They're using a GPS type system, GLONASS, I think they're not GLONASS, but GLONASS. Yeah, GLONASS is what they call their GPS, their satellite navigation system. They're all using that now. So that's kind of overwhelming. And, and it goes on and on and on and on. Helicopters, same thing. We have the Apaches and what have you. They have multiple versions. They've got the Alligator, they've got the Hind, they've got different things that are all very effective. They're not pretty, but they're very effective. And I noticed one thing when I look at the Russian air power and the way it's been operating in the Ukrainian theater. It doesn't matter if it's a helicopter or a ground attack aircraft or a fighter jet, for that matter, that's doing an air attack. They will come up on the enemy, low altitude, come up on whatever position they're going to attack. They will tilt up just ever so slightly, release all their rockets, and then sharp turn. They'll bank and do a sharp turn and skedaddle out of there. And usually when they make that sharp turn, they're going to fire off all their flares. So that's it. In other words, they'll load these things up, sneak up on the enemy, shoot off everything, bank, fire flares, and retreat. They're not exposing their aircraft to anything. And there was a recent situation where 4 Russian aircraft were shot down, 2 jets, a Sukhoi, a MiG, and 2 helicopters. And I said that this looked like a situation where Ukrainians got lucky or had an ambush set up. Well, no, it turned out it was friendly fire. This was Russian air defense screwed up and shot down their own planes because it is that good. Ukrainians can't do that. I guess I'll talk about the Belgorod thing real quick here. Belgorod, of course, is a city in Russia. It's on the other side of the border, not in Ukraine. And this is sort of centrally, eastern border, of course, centrally located. And the other day, there was an incursion. And the Western media tried to portray this incursion as Russian dissidents, patriots that were trying to start a revolution. Obviously, that wasn't the case. They were Western types, mercenaries, and Ukrainians, special forces Ukrainians. But the sad thing is they drove into this town using Western-made armored cars and vehicles. It was really sad. Okay, the markings, everything. And they immediately started assaulting civilians. When I say assault, I mean shot into civilian cars driving down the road and things like that. And they assaulted a checkpoint, a border checkpoint. And needless to say, this is as far as they got, was this checkpoint. And sure, they damaged the wall of the checkpoint, whatever it was, but all of their vehicles were disabled. Some of them, they just dumped the vehicles and fled. It's kind of sad. Now, of course, the West, they basically said that the Russians staged this whole thing and that these were captured vehicles, Humvees, things like that were towed into position so that they could photograph all of this stuff. Now, I don't know where they came up with this crap because there's plenty of film of Ukrainians stepping out of the bushes and shooting into the cars of Russian civilians driving down the road. I don't think the Russians were doing that to create some sort of a false flag. But anyway, obviously, they were trying to draw attention away from the fact that they lost, here we go, Artyomsk, or Bakhmut, and that was their answer. They had to bring the war. Somebody's bright idea was to bring the war on Russian territory and capture some villages or something of this nature and use them as some negotiation chip in some future ceasefire negotiation, which is what they're really struggling to come up with now as a way out of this business. Anyway, to add insult to injury, they've been shelling Belgorod now. And this is sort of like I wouldn't call it a diversion, but if anything, the entire front is basically surging. The Russians are surging on the entire front. So if anything, they're trying to cause a distraction or again, some sort of bargaining chip by launching these attacks on this relatively insignificant territory, these villages inside of the Russian border like that. So in other words, this entire thing is a PR battle. Now, aside from talking about the Russians and their ability to do what I'll just say before, I want to talk about the EU and NATO, but Putin did say something recently, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have his words in front of me, but he's starting to say some very ominous things about Ukraine. And he's referring to Ukraine. He's starting to refer to it, or the concept of a territory called Ukraine, in a sense of the past tense. Now, he also mentions that the West is controlling it now, and some might suggest that what he means is that the country of Ukraine is no longer there because what's there now is something that's controlled by the West. I read this a little bit differently. I read this more of him basically warning us and letting us know that the country formerly known as Ukraine, the territory, not even country, but the territory known as Ukraine, very soon will no longer be known as Ukraine. Very soon it will become Russian territory, very much the same way that Bakhmut is now Artyomsk. Anyway, I kind of see that coming. Now, there's a lot of other really scary stuff going on, but what you really have to consider is that even though the United States is working really hard to come up with some sort of a stall tactic because, for anything, the Biden administration wants to get reelected, and once he's back in office, they don't really care. They can get on with their suicide mission. Now, when I say suicide mission, that is exactly what it is, because it's just like this big spring, fall, summer, winter, spring, summer, fall offensive that they're supposedly going to be doing someday in Ukraine. It's an all or nothing thing. And when they do it, it's probably going to fail, and there won't be anything left, and the Russians will be able to basically launch their own offensive and walk over what's left of the territory formerly known as Ukraine. This is coming. And what's to stop it? NATO? Well, let me see here. Okay, something that came to my attention, a couple things came to my attention today that I'm just going to talk about here briefly, but one of them was an exercise that's going on in NATO, a NATO exercise. Let me see if I can pull this up for you, but it's, did I dump it? Yeah. Well, this exercise, it's coming up, it's going to be on June 12th. Interesting, huh? Kind of a summer, I guess. Not too far away, right? Not too far away. And it's going to be the largest exercise in NATO history, the history of NATO. Largest exercise. Now, what is it called? It's called Air Defender. It's going to be, supposedly this is German sponsored. They did one in 2022 that was in Estonia. This one, I don't know if this was going to be in Estonia too, but apparently the Germans are sponsoring this thing. It could be in Estonia. And of course, this is meant to scare the Russians. But the thing is, it's going to be all Air Force, air power, all kinds of it. Stealth jets, bombers, refuelers, F-16s, the whole gamut. And one thing that's interesting about this whole exercise, at least from the American standpoint, is that a good portion of the jets that form the American contribution are going to be Air National Guard, civilian soldiers from the United States who are basically there to defend the United States territory, but they're going to be working with NATO. Now, I don't really understand how our Air National Guard is somehow now a tool of NATO, but there it is. Not just any kind of tool, but a significant portion of this force. Now, this is going to be a significant amount of firepower with active weapons and fuel and everything else, pilots going on. And we know from so many false flags, et cetera, that very often these exercises turn into live fire exercises or hostilities. So I would not be surprised at all if the Ukrainians decided that whatever offensive they could possibly even try to pull off with all their new Leopard tanks, etc., they're going to need to do the same time to coincide with this exercise. It only makes sense because they don't have the air power. The United States is not going to commit the air power. NATO is not going to commit the air power. If they did, they'd have to train everybody. And supposedly they have trained a bunch of people, and F-16s are coming. But if they're fielding F-16s, NATO donated F-16s with Ukrainian pilots, and they have AWACS, surveillance aircraft, tankers, all this other stuff up in the air. It seems to me that that's not just provocative. That's something that we can see is easily going to turn into a full-scale NATO attack on Russia. Russian forces, and needless to say, this would probably mean a devastating attack of some sort, or an attempt at a devastating attack on Crimea. Now here's what I want to say will probably happen should the forces that control NATO decide to do this. They're going to all get shot down. Okay? All them pilots, all them fancy jets and F-30, whatever. Right now they think that these stealth jets, these whatever they are, or these the F-32s, it's like that's all we got. They think that is a wonder. That's like our last real wonder weapon, and we think that's the only thing that we've got that can survive Russian air defenses. Now that's a big suppose. That's a big hope, if you ask me. But so this is disturbing because, if anything, it would suggest that these things are necessary and would be involved in any conflict of this nature, because nothing else is going to stand a chance at even trying to penetrate Russian air defenses or be trying to neutralize Russian air defenses. Now, again, myself, I don't think it's going to happen. Now, before I talk about Russian air defenses, let's talk about American air defenses. Now, typically, American air defenses was Air Force, send up jets and planes. I want to talk about jets and planes here pretty quick, but before that, I want to talk about the Patriot missile system. The attack that took place in Kiev not too long ago was pretty dramatic. I talked about this already, but bottom line is one of these Patriot missile batteries, I believe there was actually 2 of them deployed, and they were together fielding 32 Patriot missiles. Now, a Patriot missile is intended to defeat an ICBM, a nuclear bomb coming in, or a jet, or some sort of high-value target. These things are not cheap. They're, $1.5 million each or something of this nature, and the entire system is $1.5 billion each. Anyway, I'm sure it's more than that. It's probably like $5.5 million each. But either way, yeah, I think that's what it's $5.5 million each. The Russians sent a Kinjal missile, and this is their hypersonic missile, and it's a very large missile. It's an ICBM. It's made to take out serious high-value targets, hardened high-value targets. Actually, it was designed to take out aircraft carriers, and this is the thing that we should be really concerned about, because there's really nothing to stop it. An aircraft carrier can't stop a Kinjal missile. Well, the Russian or the American media has been trying to tell us that the Kinjal missile is able to be taken out with the Patriot. Now, what happened with the Patriot missiles in Kiev is that, remember, they're $1.5 billion each. They took a single Kinjal missile that was $1 million, strictly, only $1 million, and they homed in on this thing and hit one of the systems. I mean, they're basically components that are spread out a little bit with some cables and stuff. But all they had to do was basically hit one of the components, make a big giant crater. They destroyed that system. The entire system was destroyed, and the other system apparently was compromised also. Well, I don't know if the other system was compromised. Let's just say the first system was compromised so badly that it was basically shipped back to wherever it came from. So remember, this is something that was there to defend the city. This was something that was there to protect high-value targets, and instead it became a high-value target because it was a $1.5 billion system just sitting there, asking for $1 million missile to come and destroy it, which is exactly what they did. Anyway, when they fired off those missiles, it took them 2 minutes to fire off 32 missiles. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And that's a lot of money. Okay, 300 million, I guess it is roughly, just in the missiles, not in the cost of the radar and everything else, but just in missiles, 300 million in 2 minutes. Destroyed by a single missile that cost $1 million. So, mathematically speaking, I think the Russians have got us beat on that. And we don't know how many of those things they have, but I'm pretty sure they have a lot more than we know of. And now we find out that the Iranians are going to be fielding a hypersonic missile within the year. We already know the Chinese have got one. I got to talk about Taiwan too a little bit. But anyway, Back to the European Union. Oh, look at that. The show's almost over. I've been babbling about this stuff. All right, let me just cut to the chase. The Russians aren't just winning this war on the ground. You can't beat them. There's no beating Russia. It doesn't matter what these idiots, these neocons tell you, what the propaganda says. There's no beating Russia in this. We're not going to get a nuclear war, but they're trying very hard to make us get into one. And Biden needs to get beat. Now, he was at the Air Force Academy for the graduation. Why is he at the Air Force Academy? Of course, it's because they're going to depend on the Air Force to save the day. Some of the stuff he said was really insane, like the times ahead are going to get confusing and things like that. And then he promptly tripped on the stage as he walked off. I mean, come on. What does an old man like that care? He's gonna die. Now, he's taking our money with him. This money that the Russians can't blow this stuff up quick enough. Billions of dollars, millions of dollars of stuff. We deliver millions of dollars, $500 million worth of stuff. It gets blown up immediately. So it's a big ass joke, and there's really no way out. And even if we could get out of it, the dollar is going to be a dead currency, and the BRICS is going to basically take over, and we're going to have this multipolar world. And if anything, the only thing, like I said, is going to save us from the punishment that we're probably going to get for what we've done is Occupy the Getty. I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, guys, looks like I'm not going to make it for a break. I was all afraid of not knowing what to say. I've just babbled about Russia. But like I said, if you haven't joined the Telegram group, you've got to do it. It's a really good time to do it. Things are really jumping, and the energy is with us. And those of you that just joined, again, I hope you can find the resources that you need and be patient with the trolls. I mean, obviously, I have to weed through the trolls, and I have to keep telling people not to talk to anybody about crypto. It's not me talking to you about that crap. But please join, and you got to get Telegram, of course. And if you want to contribute, and I do need those contributions, even though I'm getting my Social Security next month, I still am going to depend on you guys, I'm sure. And use the PayPal, and of course that is Stephen Kelley 714@yahoo.com. And it's so important that you do use my email, which is law17gun@aol.com for correspondence, for healing, for a copy of the book, for information about being a Jedi. But also, if you haven't visited our new webpage, it's stephendkelly.com. Just go check it out on your way to the Telegram group. And also, there's other groups out there like the Children Under the Getty page that Isabel's running. Just be aware that if you want to talk to me, though, you've got to email me. Okay? I'm going to let you guys go with that, all right? But I do want to, once again, though, I can't say thank you enough to all the people that have, become indispensable with the work that they're doing and helping to spread the word, expand everybody's knowledge of this mission. It's pretty exciting to see that happen. And you guys are getting really effective. And I know, like, when I see all this growth happening right now, I'm wondering, okay, who did that? Which one of you guys did that? And it could be either one of you. I don't know. But either way, I commend you all. And it's like I said, that somebody quoted me the other night. Keep doing what you're doing and do more. Okay? So with that, I'm going to thank you for being here and remind you every Thursday to come back to Truthcat Radio, truthcatradio.com, and tune in live if you're listening on a record, whatever it is, Rumble, etc. All right. So, again, my name is Stephen Kelley, and this is the Stephen D. Kelley Show. We're all about Occupy the Getty, but this is Truthcat Radio, www.truthcatradio, and it's still, let me see, what is it, 6:51? Wow, June 1st, 2023. Okay, so happy June 1st. I'll see you guys on the flip side. All right, promise you come back. I'll talk to y'all later. Good night. God bless. Adios, and goodbye.